All right. Welcome. It is the 28th day of October, 2025. You are listening to Global Affairs Unfiltered with me, Jack Stockwell. And we are at such an incredible time in the history of this planet where we have some wonderful opportunities for hope that are opening up. And at the same time, those who are designing the end of mankind still at their work. Now, what the Pope just recently did, I want to start off with that here quickly. What the Pope did before 10,000 people in St. Peter's Square, bringing up the concept of the coincidence of opposites that Nicholas of Cusa once presented, and in the concept of peace. The coincidence of opposites, because the idea that the human mind can think of something higher than the crisis in which it is suffering, which has a higher order of power and a magnitude than the many that brought us the crisis. And that method of thinking, of synthesizing that higher order, which did not exist before, is what makes us human. And that's exactly the law of the universe. The coincidence of opposites is exactly that kind of method of thinking. And so the Pope was addressing that concept as expressed by Nicholas of Cusa here recently in St. Peter's Square. Well, obviously, this is a big intervention into the church discussion. It has enormous leverage in bringing these concepts of Cusa and his coincidence of opposites as a problem-solving method into the current situation that is existing in the world. And I think that's really incredible because he said, the Pope said, hope remains even when we don't know all the answers. And that for sure is true, because we don't know how the world history is going to turn out. We know that you have to have a positive conception about the vision for where mankind should go to resolve the most of our problems, and I think that's very urgent. And there are things afloat right now, kind of contradictory to one another in the sense of it playing out its role, but both spell hope. And one of which, of course, is the Bering Strait Zoom conference that went on last week. And I think that really shows, what can happen if humanity does go that way. And then what I was talking about yesterday from Ted Postel as to what could happen to humanity if it doesn't go that way. And I think the fact that the Russians have now basically again made it clear that they mean it. In the case of pushing red lines, if it's continued, that has been demonstrated with the flight test on October 21st of this new Burevestnik nuclear-powered cruise missile that I was talking about yesterday, that is online or in discussions since, I think, 2018, since its development. But this here a week ago was its first flight of a several-hour-long flight covering 14,000 kilometers. Potentially, it can reach any part of the world because it's nuclear-powered. It doesn't need to be refueled, and it has incredible accuracy at any distance. And it also cannot be detected by conventional radar except in the launch and the acceleration phases, because it can fly extremely low and therefore cannot be read by normal radar. And this is, here on the one hand, you have the chance for mankind to come together in a cooperative effort to expand the possibilities of a united economic development between the two largest nuclear powers, Russia and China and the United States. And at the same time, while these developments have the potential of changing the face of this planet for the better. The Russians just demonstrated something that we haven't. I don't know where our nuclear-powered missiles are, but this thing was in the air for hours. There's nothing else like this. Now you've got the Burevestnik missile that was already demonstrated a year ago that can do the equivalent of nuclear annihilation without radiation. And they have several of those ready to go. And now they have just demonstrated the Burevestnik along with the Burevestnik. And this first flight test, as I said, in the air for several hours, can reach 14,000 kilometers, which means it can hit anywhere on the planet with precise accuracy. And you can't track it. You can see it take off, you can see it accelerate, and then it's gone. Poof, disappears on the screen. Why? Because it drops so low it's below radar. Now, it just comes to show you that we're in a situation where the possibility of coming close to nuclear war just got closer, and people should realize that there is no winner from the war. And now the Europeans are still on the idea that Russia has to be defeated by a strategic defeat, which is an impossibility, and it's incomprehensible that the Europeans are still using that kind of language. Because the only thing that can happen is that you're going to end up with a nuclear war destroying all of civilization. But there will be no defeat of Russia. Medvedev has been talking about it. I think Yushakov has mentioned it a couple of times. The doomsday machine. Because there will be no defeat of Russia, because if Russia comes to the point where they have to, they will launch the doomsday machine, the dead hand. And even if there would have been a decapitation strike on the entire Russian leadership, and everybody knows that, I mean, it's completely incomprehensible. I mean, why they still pursue this kind of a policy. And this was just reiterated just a day or two ago by Lavrov, who, after a discussion with Marco Rubio, basically said, we don't want to put undue pressure on the United States government because we know that they're under unbelievable pressure from the Europeans, who basically do not want a peace agreement. And they're demanding a ceasefire, even though it is clear that will not work. And he basically was saying very clearly that Rubio did not stick to what was discussed with President Trump in Alaska, even if he used a very diplomatic language to say that. So what does all that mean? That means that no matter how hard Trump is pushing to bring this Ukrainian thing to an end, and he's not pushing hard enough, but no matter how much he's pushing now, the Russians simply are not going to sit there and have some diplomatic ceasefire arrangement, because, I mean, just you look at what the French are doing. The Army Chief of Staff, Pierre Schill, in addressing the National Assembly just the end of last week, basically was on the same line, saying that they want to have French troops deployed in Ukraine, and that they don't want to go. What they're creating are 3 alert levels, including a potential deployment of 7,000 French troops into the Ukraine, who could be mobilized in 12 hours to 5 days, and then there's the NATO level and so forth. But in any case, it's fully on this idea that this war has to be continued. Now, Trump is trying to bring this to an end, as I said, not hard enough, but he's trying to. And he's getting all this pressure from Europe to keep it going. The madness of the European leaders what is the stick in the mud here. Now, we also know that there are two areas in the southern part of the Donetsk, well, getting pretty close to Zaporizhia, where there are two separate areas of 10,000 Ukrainian troops completely surrounded by Russian troops. They can't get in, they can't get out. The noose is getting tighter. The Russians are just simply waiting for them to surrender, and then they can go home. But they're not surrendering. I mean, this thing is over with. The war is over with. And the madness of Macron and Merz and Starmer, that they can try to keep this thing going. They're just like Trump, they are answering to their donors. And a lot of Trump's donors don't want the war to end. And so Trump is kind of caught between being a patriot and trying to stop the killing, as he says over and over again. And at the same time, the war-making powers that own a part of Trump keep pushing for the war. Why? Because they really honestly believe that they can bring the Russian Federation to its knees and surrender, and then we put in our own little lackey president like Zelensky to be in charge of Russia, while Russia gets chopped up into different districts, all having their own premiers and fighting among themselves as they're broken up into racial groups, so that the powers that be can get in there and get the oil, the gas, and the strategic minerals. There's just a small problem. Russia has this doomsday machine. And the doomsday machine, the dead hand that I've explained here several times, Scott Ritter does a very good job of it, is that even if a decapitation strike were to occur on the Kremlin, and all the leadership was taken out, Zakharova, Lavrov, Gerasimov, Putin, Ulanov, and the rest of them were all to be taken out in one strike, and the Russian army fell into disarray, they would start answering, but some kind of a disarray would take place, because the West wouldn't just be attacking the Kremlin. It'd be hitting every known missile site that we know of that the Russians have. And the way the dead hand works is that there's a series of sensors around the Russian Federation, which you know is rather large, that if it doesn't pick up communication from the Kremlin, if it no longer is receiving communication from military headquarters, if it's no longer being fed digital signals that indicate stand down, it will stand up in 2 weeks after the end of that information flow and launch from all over the Federation, covering sites throughout Europe and the United States. And when you bring in the Burevestnik, I don't know if the Oreshnik can go across the Atlantic, but the Burevestnik certainly can. I mean, I kept trying to imagine a nuclear-powered missile. How would that work? And it must be fascinating how the mechanics of this thing that doesn't run out of fuel, and it can fly for hours. It's just unbelievable that that's sitting there at the same time Macron and Merz and Starmer are talking about sending their own troops. Now, Starmer says, well, there won't be any British troops there. They've talked about it in the past that there would be. Now Starmer's saying there won't be. Merz and his government, that is dropping rapidly in popularity with the German people, want to be war ready by 2029 against Russia. I mean, even in Germany now, the German army, the Bundeswehr, is going around to the German high schools trying to talk German seniors into joining the army right after high school graduation. And then Macron now is saying, well, we can mobilize from 5 hours up to 12 days, 7,000 hardened, I don't know why they would call them hardened, French troops into the Ukraine. And I mean, it's the bottom line here is that from a European point of view, the war must be continued. And unbelievably short-sighted against the interests of Germany is the fact that the foreign minister, Vadafol, just canceled a 2-day trip to China in response to the fact that he was not getting any meetings. The German foreign minister, where Germany and China do a lot of trade, and the German foreign minister was trying to take off to China for a 2-day trip, and it's been canceled because nobody wants to meet with him, except the foreign minister Wang Yi was planning to meet with him, but nobody else. And this is due to the fact that the German foreign minister is basically saying that China was trying to change the status of Taiwan in a unilateral way. Now, what does that mean? Well, it goes against all international law because both the Cairo Conference as well as the Potsdam Declaration back in 1945 clearly defined the one China policy. And despite idiots in our Senate, I'm thinking of Cruz and Graham and some of the others who think that we should be sending weapons to Taiwan. This has been the UN policy for years. And so out of one side of the mouth, the United States foreign policy is one China. Out of the other side of the mouth, these just hothead idiots, people I encouraged the election of, oh my goodness, in the last election. I mean, after Deng Xiaoping introduced the reform and the opening up policy, it was very clear to everybody, accepted as normal, the one China policy. And it was very clear that everybody, was on that. So when Vadapol now comes out with this line that gives justice to the fact that Foreign Minister Gao Zhaikun said that what Germany is now pursuing is coming closer or is the same thing as support for Taiwanese independence movement, the relationship between Germany and China just got soured, making it clear that Germany wants to fully stay in cooperation with European countries who are starting to break from that policy against the other European countries who believe strongly in the one China policy. And then if you look at, that's how desperate things are in Germany. If you look at the just concluded annual nuclear maneuvers, I mentioned yesterday, Steadfast Noon, in which 14 NATO countries participated, which exercised a possible attack in Europe with U.S. nuclear weapons stationed in Europe, where for the first time, the new NATO members, Finland and Sweden, participated. Denmark, for the first time, provided the base for this exercise of Steadfast Noon, and the German government participated, especially with the participation of their nuclear airport, Büchel, which is now being improved with an enormous sum of 2 billion euros to place future U.S. F-35 jets, which are suited to deliver the new nuclear bomb, the B-6112 type. They'll be stationed there, and that was the whole exercise. At the same time, the Russians are demonstrating this nuclear-powered, nuclear-carrying missile. Uh, this would probably make a good primetime series. I how I quit worrying and learned to love the bomb, and the movie, yeah, that movie. Uh, I just this madness just cracks me up that this goes on like this. And then the whole purpose of this is to prepare for a coming war with Russia, which could only end up nuclear. And all this money which is being spent on conventional armaments is a complete waste. The money on the Volkswagen plant in Bavaria that is now not turning out Volkswagens, it's turning out tanks. A complete waste of money. It's kind of like everybody knows about Star Wars, the movie Star Wars, especially the first one in the Death Star. And what happened to Alderaan at the beginning of the movie? And the Death Star's incredible ability to create death on a massive scale. And what did the Rebel Alliance have to answer it with? Nothing. There was no answer to the Death Star, except when one unnamed engineer happened to notice a slight weakness in the construction of the Death Star that would allow its annihilation and, total destruction. If the theory that if some missiles entering into a certain shaft could reach the center and blow the whole thing up. I mean, just it would take an absolute miracle. And then, of course, enter Luke Skywalker, the miracle man, who's able to bring this to pass. Now, that all, of course, is fictitious. The point I want to make here is the awesome power of this Death Star against the Rebel Alliance. And had the Rebel Alliance not discovered this weakness, there would be no more Rebel Alliance, because they would just go from one planet to the next, destroying all of these planets that housed, kept, quarantined, sequestered, hidden any aspect of the Rebel Alliance. And so here in Europe, in real-time reality today, you got these, and this is not supported by the German people, and it's not supported by the French people, and it's not supported by the English people. Every bit as much as a lot of policies here in our country, carried out by the current administration, are not necessarily supported by all the people. It's the leaders. And it's the leaders who always, decade after decade after decade, create the wars that kill everybody except their sons and daughters, at the behest of the donor class that put them in the positions of power that they're in. Now, there's a lot more subterfuge than that, but that's kind of basically what's going on. And so what is taking place in these countries now, and with Macron in his last few days, actually saying we're going to send 7,000, we want to be ready to send 7,000 troops within 5 hours to 12 days, have 7,000 troops on the ground in the Ukraine. What do you think is going to happen to those 7,000 troops? And Macron knows what's going to happen to them, just like these two enclaves that are created in the southern part of the Ukraine, almost to the Crimea, of two separate groups of 10,000 Ukrainian troops, totally surrounded by the Russians, and due to the incredible peaceful patience of Putin, they're not being destroyed. They're just being contained until they surrender. And if they surrender, they can go home. Lay down your weapons and go home. And then with the Oreshnik and the Burevestnik missiles being demonstrated, and Europe thinks that they're going to defeat Russia? I mean, it's clear that if it ever does come to war, nothing will be left of Germany. If they bring in these, if this Operation Noon, well, it's come to an end, but the idea is the base there in Buchel, Buchel, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, in Germany, to house nuclear weapons on the ground on German dirt for the first time ever. And if war does get worse, there will be no Germany. It'll be washed out overnight. And as Ted Postel has made it very clear, I mean, at the same time, you have this growing debate about the European nuclear umbrella, not only the nuclear participation of Germany and other European troops in the American nuclear umbrella, but also its own nuclear umbrella of Germany, which is completely unclarified, given the fact that Germany wants to have a say in French nuclear forces, which France completely rejects. And there is right now still the overwhelming population in Germany who's against it. 72%, 3 out of every 4 Germans, have expressed in their polls they do not want Germany to house nuclear weapons. But if you look at the various age groups, it's very telling as it is different. Only 7% of people aged 45 to 54, only 7% think they should have nukes. 11% of Germans aged 65 and older are for the German nuke, but more than half of all Germans aged 18 to 24 are for Germany to have a nuclear weapon, which I think is extremely worrisome, because if the young people are moving in that direction, it's a very bad sign of the times. And so we're at a rather incredible turmoil. I mean, you have on the other side the mood of people swinging in a completely different direction. That is, illustrated by this Irish thing, this Connolly, Catherine Connolly, I think, for president of Ireland. And she is supported by major left-wing party coalition, the Sinn Féin and the Social Democrats and the Labour people. And during her campaign, she emphasized Irish neutrality and criticized the European Union for its militarization at the expense of social welfare, which is a lot of the screaming that's going on in Germany right now, as social aid, social benefits are disappearing left and right because they're putting all the money into military. I mean, it's absolute madness. So she attacked the NATO warmongering and even said that what is happening right now in Germany has parallels to what was going on in Germany in the 1930s. And then she also attacked Israel's policy of genocide in the Gaza. And that looks, very interesting, because this is definitely Irish-led anti-British traditions. And then likewise, the new prime minister in Japan, Sanai Takachi, is making interesting statements saying she doesn't support the U.S. trade war against China. She thinks the tariff policy is the worst treaty from World War II, the most dangerous mistake of the 21st century. And then she's still demanding a peace treaty from World War II with Russia. Japan and Russia were at war with one another during World War II. It came to an end, but there was never a peace treaty between them, and Japan has been requesting that for decades. So on the side of the U.S. policy in Western Hemisphere, it unfortunately kind of looks like there's an increase in the attacks against the so-called drug boats in the Pacific. I was talking about that yesterday as well. And Trump said, well, we're just going to kill them. We came, we saw, we killed them. We find them, we're going to kill them. And there are rumors about the stationing right now of B-1 bombers near to Venezuela. Well, that doesn't look very good. There have been at least 9 attacks on these smaller boats in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific in the recent period. More than 30 people have been killed. The reports are that there are about 37 people dead from Venezuela, Colombia, Trinidad, and Tobago. And there's also now talk about the preparation for a ground operation into Venezuela, which, of course, the Colombian president, Petro, completely denounces. So it looks rather dangerous here in our own hemisphere. And if the policy of driving China out of Latin America remains, and the United States deprives themselves of the only policy to solve the migrant problem in a humanist way, which would be to develop Latin America together with the Chinese, I think that's what should be pushed. Oh no, Jack, the Monroe Doctrine. Only the development of the home countries, the El Salvadorians, the Nicaraguans, the Costa Ricans, the Hondurans, the Guatemalans, would rather be in their own country if there was economic development. If they could earn there what they're earning here, they would stay there. Otherwise, there is this growing concern in Europe, and particularly about the increasing surveillance policies, the end of free speech, the control mechanisms against free speech that will end free speech in Europe, the end of democracy, the end of the European digital identity, the idea of the European digital identity, which will be a surveillance mechanism for all transport, for all traffic, banking, communications, motion profiles, finance. And basically there is real debate going on in Germany, just to mention a very successful party congress in the Bavarian Buso this past Sunday. So I think it's when you look at the perspective here, this is just an incredible moment in history, where on the one side it's very, very clear that the history and fate of humanity literally hangs by a thread, and on the other side you can see the gigantic movements and the forces ranging from the Vatican to the BRICS to the Shanghai Cooperation, the global majority, the decent human beings that still live in the Western Hemisphere, are all striving to get into this new era of humanity, of peace and economic development. And so it's between these two tensions: the complete destruction and annihilation of the human species, and on the other side, a clear vision that we can reach a new age where hopefully the idea of war as a means of conflict resolution will be overcome for good, as a relic of barbarism that it is, and not worthy of humanity. Because why should we keep killing each other for the benefit of a few? Why should there be the continuing slaughter of Palestinians for the benefit of a few? Why should we continue to slaughter Ukrainian young men on the battlefield for the benefits of just a few? Because it's never the people who are at war with each other. This war that's going on in the Ukraine, what's going on in the Middle East, this isn't created by the people who are dying. It's created by some oligarchical imperial interest who sacrifice their own people for these wars. And that phase of humanity has to be overcome. So, I want to add a couple of more comments from Postel from yesterday, because it was I think what you have, I mean, why should Russia put up with more dangerous and threatening nuclear weapons even closer to their national capital and the decision-making centers that Cuba was to the United States back in 1962? Why would Russia do that? With this recent war game, strategic noon, or whatever the noon thing is, steadfast noon, to create a nuclear base for nuclear carrying F-35s in Germany. Obviously, the Russians are aware of every single move that was involved with this. Why would Russia put up with this? I mean, this is exactly the reflection of security concerns. This is expressed by many people, especially those in the European Parliament. Can you explain to me why Russia is wrong here, when they were given no alternative by the West but to invade the Ukraine? I mean, if you look at their actions, they were driven by the U.S. and the British and the Western reactions to continue a war that the Russians did not want. And they were happy to pull out. They made it clear when they should have pulled out or would have pulled out of the Ukraine, they did in fact start pulling out when the Americans and the British came in through Boris Johnson, Bojo, and told Zelensky, we can support you. Now, had they not done that, had they said the opposite, hey, Volodymyr, you're on your own. We're not going to support you in any way. If you agree to the negotiation you just entered into with Russia, that will cause them to pull out now. No, it was the Americans and the British who stopped the Russian withdrawal and forced the Russians to do what they did not want to do, which would have full-scale war in Ukraine. This is the kind of leadership that we're dealing with now in this country as well as Western Europe. This is what these people want to do again. And unfortunately, you can't have a war you can't recover from. A nuclear war that would be the end of civilization. Now, this current situation in Germany, also true in France and Britain to varying degrees, because Britain actually is in worse condition, is worse shape right now than Germany. France is not quite as bad a shape, but it will be if Macron's policies are followed. And the economic situation in Germany is the result of this Ukraine war. And the economic, the United States, let's back up here a second. The United States destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline. Everybody knows the United States did it. I mean, Biden admitted it. And the argument was if you could show how idiotic and ill-informed Biden was, and how reckless he was with bad intel. I mean, he did more damage to the country that he thought was an ally, in this case Germany and France and the UK, than he did to Russia, because Russia was in a position to not sell oil and gas through the Nord Stream pipeline to Germany, but Germany was not in a position to not have oil and gas from Russia. And so the German economy screeched to a halt because of the loss of this cheap oil and gas coming from Russia. And for the last 3 years, the German economy has had essentially zero gross domestic product growth. Germany is currently right now in the stage of deindustrialization. And if I were a leader of Germany, if I was the king of Deutschland, like Friedrich Merz is supposed to be, my first concern would be to the people, to my country, to my economy. But he's not concerned with that because he is a BlackRock executive. His loyalty is to BlackRock stock. BlackRock wants Ukraine. And so Merz is just going to further ruin the German economy and the German social system by diverting what limited funds they already have in a deindustrializing economy, which is deindustrializing, as I sit here, away from the people of Germany to build weapons to prepare for a war with Russia. Germany preparing to go to war with Russia. Has Merz not heard of Napoleon? Has he not heard of Hitler? And the Russians are not interested in attacking or occupying Germany. They don't want France. They don't want Great Britain. You have these leaders who are so desperate to cover up their disastrous decisions that have caused this economic collapse across Europe, that they're willing to try to instigate a war and further damage to the well-being of all of their people by creating this false argument for a future war. And this is extraordinary. It's extraordinary because the so-called democratic governments, where you're dealing with parliaments and the governments that exist there in Europe now that want war, there's no mechanism for the people to stop them. So when people want to talk about democracy in the West, this is just nonsense. The average German does not want this. Polls show it. It's ridiculous. There is no threat from Russia. So what we have is a group of political leaders who are ignorant, who've done terrible things to their own people economically, and who are now trying to cover it up by arguing that they have to have a war with Russia when Russia poses no threat. That is what is happening. And as I said earlier in the program, the Bundeswehr is now going around in the schools advertising voluntary joining of the Army for pupils. And I know that these pupils are being told absolutely wrong reasons. But they get money and they get good pay. And they can maybe perhaps learn a profession like we have here in our services. You could go into the Air Force and learn to become an A&P mechanic, airframe and power plant mechanic, and they pay great in the private sector. An A&P mechanic. Or you can go into any of the services here in this country as well as Germany and become a diesel mechanic and work at a job that pays really good money without student debt. And that's what they're telling these kids. And I think that's adding to this betrayal against them, because they're going to end up being cannon fodder of the Russian army when these nukes show up in Germany, and Russia isn't going to sit by and let them sit there. They're going to take them out on the German ground. They've already said they would do that. I mean, even the official places are saying that when it comes to a war, the 1,000, and this is, I think it was in France. I think it was in France where the emergency care, first responder, hospital systems are told to prepare for 1,000 casualties a day. Now, are they telling these kids in Germany that we need you in there because we need to be able to replace 1,000 casualties a day with your blood. So we have to recruit more of you young people. Now, is that a reason to join the Army, especially in light of that? I mean, there's zero chance if it comes to that. So, and if it's nuclear, it won't be thousands of casualties a day. It'll be millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of casualties a day if the nukes go off. Because this war will not remain limited to non-nuclear conventional weapons. And anybody who thinks it's only going to be thousands or tens of thousands are wrong. It's going to be tens of millions and hundreds of millions. And that's the real truth of what this war would bring. So, now for the good stuff. I'm going to break away from that for a minute because it's too damn depressing. But that's what's going on. Now, this is from the New York Post. I got a kick out of this. There is an app out there, a UFO tracker. And it's showing thousands, mind you, of these rather eerie underwater objects lurking off the U.S. coast. Thousands of them. And pictures are coming in all the time. Green lights, shadowy movements during the day that are not representative of a submarine. And as they used to say, the truth is out there. Now they're saying the truth is under there. So this popular UFO reporting app has recorded thousands of sightings of these unidentified submersible objects, USOs, near U.S. waterways. Phenomena which high-ranking U.S. Navy officials warned could pose a threat to national security. No kidding. Really? So Enigma, which touts itself as the largest queryable historical sighting database for global UFO sightings, claims it's received reports on over 30,000 unidentified flying objects and unidentified anomalous phenomena since launching in late 2022. Enigma, E-N-I-G-M-A. But the sightings haven't been limited to the skies, because there's reports coming in about these strange objects rising up out of the depths of the sea or plunging into the water without so much as a splash. And if you were watching any of those little TikTok there, those things that the UF Air Force was showing flying at incredible speed, existing novelistic behavior in the air, and then sinking into the water without a splash. So as of August, Enigma has also logged more than 9,000 mysterious sightings within 10 miles of U.S. shorelines and major bodies of water, 500 of them within 5 miles, with more than 150 of these reports describing objects hovering above or descending down into the waterways. And this was reported in Marine Technology News. And so the U.S. states with the most reported USO sightings were California and Florida, both among the top 3 U.S. states with the most ocean coastline. One of the most bizarre reports includes phone camera video of unexplained green lights traveling beneath the surface of the ocean. These things are recorded and then uploaded to Enigma, where you can see them yourself. Now, I'm looking at a map here of the east coast of the United States with these little red dots where reported sightings have been seen from all the way up to New England, and then just tons of them along the New York, Jersey, Maryland, Virginia, Carolina borders, down into Florida, down into the Keys. So this app has released these maps plotting out these reported sightings, represented as clusters of these little orange dots, as I said, running up and down the East Coast and West Coast, mind you. And the UFO sightings, of course, are nothing new. They're often dismissed as crackpottery by much of the scientific community, or relegated to the stuff of science fiction. But retired Navy Admiral Tim Gallaudet, warns the UFOs, with the ability to go from air to sea without crashing or even creating a splash, could have, get this, world-changing ramifications. He said, the fact that unidentified objects with unexplainable characteristics are entering U.S. water space and the Department of Defense is not raising a giant red flag is a sign that the government is not sharing all it knows about the all-domain anomalous phenomena. That was published last year in March. So the alarm bells were raised in July of 2019 when the USS Omaha recorded a UFO UAP that vanished into the ocean without a trace after buzzing a Navy fleet off the coast of San Diego. Video of the incident was verified by the Pentagon, displaying capabilities Gallaudet said jeopardizes U.S. maritime security, which is already weakened by our relative ignorance about the ocean, the global ocean itself. Now, I don't know if it's true, but I once heard that only about 5% of the ocean bottom has been mapped. Only 5%. I was playing with numbers the other day and I was thinking, if you were to liken 5% of the U.S. coastline from Seattle down to San Diego, throughout the Gulf of Mexico and the west coast of Florida, all the way up the east coast to Maine, up to New Brunswick, even that far. 5% of that coastline might be likened to the coastline of the Carolinas, and that's it. What if that's all we knew about a mapped out coastline of the United States east and west coast? It was nothing more than the size of the Carolinas. So what's out there in the ocean that hasn't been mapped? So in the report that came out of this UFO UAP thing that vanished into the ocean without a trace after buzzing a Navy fleet off the coast of San Diego, as I said, the video was verified by the Pentagon. And in his 29-page report on UFO-focused think tank of the Sol, S-O-L, Foundation, Gallaudet said there's a documented pattern of similar phenomena being reported, not just this one. He said pilots, credible observers, calibrated military instrumentation have recorded objects accelerating at rates and crossing the air-sea interface in ways not possible for anything made by humans. Wow. So now, I'm going to tell you what I think this is, especially this 3-eye atlas. If you've been following that, this solar system interloper that's changing direction and changing speed. Its last published speed was tracked at 130,000 miles an hour. That would allow it to go around the Earth 5 times in 1 hour period. That's some speed. And it's changing direction, and it's exhibiting some rather novelistic behavior of its own that's certainly not consistent with a comet or something else that might be approaching the Earth in a linear fashion at a predictable speed. This thing is outside all of that. Now, the person I consider to be the foremost UFO researcher is Jacques Vallée, Vallee, Jacques Vallée from France. And he said, these things are not what you're being told by the government. There's something completely, totally different. And we are being set up by a dark part of the government for a massive, seeming like attack from space from non-human entities that will not be real, but it will look real. And that things like this three-eye atlas and other kinds of early warnings of some harbinger threatening peace and stability on this planet is being set to get the population ready to swallow the most devious, deceiving event in the history of this country. He says if you've been to any of these big celebrations, Olympics, things like this, where they do these tremendous aerial displays of thousands of drones all in unison with one another to create incredible images, he said that's just the menu. You haven't seen the meal. The meal will be something that looks as real as anything could possibly be. The old blue beam that you heard about from the past. And he said he thinks that's what this is. And why would they be doing it? To have the world in such international, country to country, absolute panic of war with aliens, and there will be demonstrations of it, that we will all drop our national sovereignties and come under one flag, one government, one leader, one influence, in order to combat the enemy from space. Now, as hard as that is to believe, that makes as much sense to me as some of the other explanations of this otherworldly phenomena, and especially these thousands of reports recently of underwater activity within 5 miles of the U.S. coast, of people filming this stuff and turning it in. Driven by, flown by, controlled by something other than humans, as Gallaudet said. All right, that's going to be it for today's program. I need to get back into here. Oh no, today Lowell will be there. Lowell will take over here in just a few minutes at K-Talk. And I will be back tomorrow at 7 a.m. with a health program. I've got a new fee structure in my office I think you'd be interested in. A new fee structure that will begin tomorrow. So you keep your wits about you. Study these things on your own. Don't take it because I said it. And I will happily be back tomorrow to take care of these things for you. I am going to end my transmission at K-Talk, so be careful, be safe. I'll see you tomorrow. And for the stream, I hope this is being recorded and will be there later. Oh, a lot of people on the stream today. Good. Good to see that. I'll see you.